The fearless rookie. When Marc Marquez arrived in MotoGP in 2013, the sport had never seen anything like him. At 20 years old, he was the reigning Moto2 world champion. But nobody expected what was about to happen. MotoGP was different, harder, more dangerous. The bikes had over 250 horsepower and required years to master. Marquez didn't care about the learning curve. He threw the rulebook out from day one. In his debut race at Qatar, he qualified second and finished third on the podium. In the second race at Austin, a brand new circuit, he took pole position and won, a rookie winning the second race of the season. The paddock was stunned, but that was just the beginning. Marquez didn't just win races, he rewrote what was possible on a motorcycle. He saved crashes that should have been impossible to save. He'd lose the front end in corners, stick his elbow out, and somehow bring the bike back under control. Physics suggested he should crash. Marquez found a way to defy them. He won 6 races in his rookie season. He battled with Jorge Lorenzo and Dani Pedrosa, established champions on factory Honda bikes, and at Valencia, the final round, Marquez clinched the world championship. At 20 years and 266 days, he became the youngest MotoGP champion in history. It wasn't just the speed that shocked people, it was the fearlessness. He overtook on corners where others braked. He went for gaps that didn't exist. He rode on the absolute limit every single lap, pushing boundaries that veterans wouldn't touch. This version of Marquez was pure instinct and raw talent. No fear, no hesitation, just a kid who believed he was unbeatable and rode like it. The rookie sensation had announced himself as the future of motorcycle racing, and he was only getting started. The alien. After winning the championship in his rookie year, Marquez could have relaxed, consolidated, played it safe. Instead, he went to war with the entire grid. From 2014 to 2016, Marquez entered a phase where he looked genuinely superhuman. His ability to save crashes became legendary. There's footage of him saving falls at over 150 miles per hour, the bike sliding sideways, his knee dragging, his elbow scraping the asphalt, and somehow he'd pull it back. It happened so often that people stopped being surprised. In 2014, he won 13 races out of 18. 13. The championship was wrapped up with 3 races remaining. He made it look easy. Rossi, Lorenzo, and Pedrosa couldn't touch him. He was riding at a level nobody could match. The saves became his trademark. At Aragon, he saved a crash in qualifying that defied belief. The bike was sideways, the front wheel locked, and he pulled it back. At Phillip Island, he saved multiple crashes in a single race and still finished on the podium. People started calling him the alien, a rider operating on a different plane of existence. In 2015, things got complicated. Marquez won the first 2 races, but then Rossi and Lorenzo started fighting for the championship. At Sepang, Marquez and Rossi had an infamous clash. Rossi accused Marquez of helping Lorenzo by racing him too hard. The contact happened. Rossi went wide, and the rivalry turned toxic. Marquez didn't win the title that year. Lorenzo took it. But the drama had elevated Marquez into a different conversation. He wasn't just fast. He was controversial, polarizing, and impossible to ignore. In 2016, he bounced back and won his 5th world championship across all classes. But the season wasn't clean. He crashed constantly while pushing for wins. At Mugello, Sachsenring, and Aragon, he went down hard. But he kept getting back up, kept pushing, kept winning. This version of Marquez was riding on the absolute edge of disaster. Every race looked like it could end in catastrophe, but somehow he kept finding the limit without crossing it. The alien was untouchable when he stayed on the bike, and even when he fell, he'd remount and fight back. This was Marquez at his most spectacular, most aggressive, and most unstoppable. He'd redefined what was possible on 2 wheels, and the entire paddock was trying to figure out how to beat him. The dominant force. From 2017 to 2019, Marquez reached his absolute peak. He wasn't just winning championships, he was dominating MotoGP in a way the sport hadn't seen since Valentino Rossi in his prime. And he was doing it with a style that was uniquely his own, aggressive, fearless, and brutally effective. In 2017, he won his 4th MotoGP title, 6 race wins, 11 podiums, and consistent point scoring that wore down his rivals. Dovizioso pushed him hard on the Ducati, and they produced some of the greatest battles in MotoGP history. At Austria, they went bar to bar on the final lap. At Motegi, Marquez passed Dovizioso on the last corner. These weren't just races, they were gladiatorial combat at 200 miles per hour. But Marquez's consistency won out. When he couldn't win, he finished 2nd or 3rd. He rarely crashed out anymore. The raw aggression had been refined into calculated dominance. In 2018, he was even better. 9 race wins and his 5th MotoGP championship. He clinched the title with 3 races remaining, but the manner of his wins was what impressed. At Assen, he came from 16th on the grid after a qualifying qualifying crash and fought through to win. At Aragon, he won his 6th consecutive race at the circuit. At Phillip Island, he produced a last-lap masterclass, passing multiple riders in the final corners. This was Marquez combining his alien ability with championship maturity. He knew when to attack and when to settle for points. He knew when to take risks and when to play it safe. The bike control was still superhuman. He'd run wide, touch the grass at 180 miles per hour, and somehow keep it together. Then came 2019, and Marquez delivered his masterpiece season. 12 race wins out of 19 rounds. The championship sealed with 4 races to go. He won at circuits where Honda had no business winning. At Austin, his 7th consecutive victory at the track. At Sachsenring, his 10th straight win at the German circuit. At Thailand, he won despite having a shoulder injury that required surgery after the season. The dominance was suffocating. Quartararo was fast on the Yamaha, but he was a rookie. Dovizioso tried to fight, but Marquez was too consistent. Rossi was fading. Vinales couldn't find consistency. Marquez had no real challenger. What made this era so impressive wasn't just the wins. It was the saves, the comebacks, the moments where he turned potential disasters into victories. He crashed in qualifying at Kota and still won the race from 9th on the grid. He had a huge crash at Sepang in practice, got back on the bike, and took pole position. This version of Marquez was complete. The speed, the racecraft, the mental strength, the physical conditioning, everything had aligned. He was 26 years old and looked like he'd dominate MotoGP for the next decade. 8 world championships across all classes, 6 in MotoGP, over 50 MotoGP wins. And he was still in his prime. The dominant force looked unstoppable. Then everything changed. The Broken Warrior, July 19th, 2020, Jerez, Spain, the first race after the COVID lockdown. Marquez qualified on pole as usual. He was leading the race as usual. Then, on lap 4, he lost the front at turn 3. The bike flipped. Marquez went down hard. His right arm took the full impact. He got up quickly trying to minimize the damage, but something was wrong. Doctors confirmed he'd broken his humerus, the upper arm bone. Surgery was scheduled immediately. A titanium plate was inserted. 3 days later, Marquez shocked everyone by showing up at the next race in Jerez, attempting to ride. He made it through qualifying, but realized mid-session that his arm couldn't handle the forces. He withdrew before the race. Then came the disaster. The plate in his arm broke. A simple action, opening a window at home, and the titanium plate snapped. The injury that should have healed became a nightmare. More surgery, another plate, months of recovery, but the bone wouldn't heal properly. The plate broke again. Doctors tried a bone graft, taking bone from his hip to reinforce his arm. Marquez missed the entire 2020 season. He returned in 2021, but he wasn't the same. The arm wasn't fully healed. His riding style, which relied on throwing the bike into corners and using his upper body strength to control it, was compromised. He crashed constantly. At Portimao, he went down in warm-up and suffered another injury, this time affecting his vision. At Aragon, he crashed twice in one weekend. The saves that used to work didn't anymore. His body wouldn't cooperate. He won 3 races in 2021, showing flashes of the old Marquez, but the consistency was gone. The championship fight was never realistic. By the end of 2021, Marquez made another decision. He'd undergo a 4th surgery on his arm. The titanium plate would be removed and replaced with a completely new one. The recovery would take months. He'd missed the start of the 2022 season. The Broken Warrior was fighting not just for wins, but to prove he could still compete. The crashes continued into 2022. At Mandalika, he had a massive high side that left him with concussion and vision problems. At Catalunya, another crash. At Assen, he fractured his hand. His body was breaking down. The years of superhuman saves and impossible riding finally extracting their toll. This version of Marquez was painful to watch. The speed was still there in flashes, but the confidence was shaken. The invincibility was gone. He'd gone from the most dominant rider in MotoGP to someone fighting just to finish races. For 2 years, questions hung over him. Would he ever be the same? Could his arm handle the stress of racing at the limit? Was the golden era over? The Broken Warrior refused to give up, but nobody knew if he'd ever return to his peak. The comeback king. In 2023, something started to shift. Marquez was still on the Honda, a bike that had become uncompetitive, difficult, and frankly dangerous. Honda's development had gone in the wrong direction. The bike was unstable, unpredictable, and none of their riders could tame it. But Marquez kept fighting. He scored podiums on a bike that had no business finishing in the top 3. At Termas de Rio Hondo in Argentina, he finished 2nd in the sprint and the main race. At Le Mans, another podium. He was dragging results out of machinery that was betraying him. Then came the biggest decision of his career. After 11 years with Honda, after 6 MotoGP titles with the brand, Marquez announced he was was leaving. He was joining Gresini Ducati, not even the factory team, for 2024, on a year-old bike. It shocked the paddock. Why would an 8-time world champion move to a satellite team? Because Marquez knew the Honda project was broken, and he needed a competitive bike to prove he was still elite. The 2024 season on the Ducati has been his redemption. In pre-season testing, he crashed hard at Sepang, breaking his hand again. But when the season started, everything clicked. At Portimao, his third race on the Ducati, he won the sprint race. The emotion was overwhelming. His first win in 1,043 days. He broke down in tears after crossing the line. All the pain, all the surgeries, all the doubt, it poured out. At Aragon, he won the main race, a dominant performance at a track he'd won it 9 times before. The GOAT was back. At Phillip Island, he won again in spectacular fashion, showing racecraft and aggression that reminded everyone of his peak years. He finished third in the championship behind Martin and Bagnaia, but he'd proven the most important point. Marc Marquez could still win at the highest level. At 31 years old, with a rebuilt arm and a new team, Marquez showed that the alien never left. He was just on the wrong equipment. This version of Marquez was different from the dominant force of 2019. He was more calculated, more patient, but the speed was still there. The saves were still there. The aggression, when it matters, is still there. The comeback king had returned from the brink, silencing every doubter who said he was finished. The seventh heaven. In 2025, Marquez entered a new chapter that would define his legacy forever. After proving himself on the satellite Gresini Ducati, he moved to the factory Ducati Lenovo team, partnering with 2-time defending champion Pecco Bagnaia. This was the move everyone had been waiting for. 2 world-class champions on equal machinery, the best bike on the grid, fighting for the title. The tension started immediately. Bagnaia was Ducati's golden boy, the rider who delivered back-to-back championships in 2022 and 2023. Now, he had to share the garage with a legend who had 8 world titles and nothing left to prove except that he could win one more. The 2025 season delivered exactly what people expected: fireworks. From the opening race, Marquez and Bagnaia pushed each other to the absolute limit. The internal battle at Ducati became the defining storyline of the season. What made this campaign special was watching Marquez combine everything he'd learned: the raw speed of his youth, the racecraft of his dominant years, the wisdom earned through injury and comeback. He knew this was likely his last realistic shot at a 7th MotoGP title, and he wasn't going to waste it. The racing was intense but calculated. He picked his battles carefully. The crashes that plagued his earlier comeback years were gone. He finished races, scored points consistently, and won when it mattered most. At 32 years old, with a rebuilt arm and questions about whether his body could handle a full championship fight, Marquez answered every doubt. When the season reached its conclusion, Marquez stood on top, his 7th MotoGP World Championship, matching Valentino Rossi's record, 11 years after his first, 6 years after his last. Through broken bones, failed surgeries, and moments where retirement seemed inevitable, Marquez had clawed his way back to the summit. The emotion after clinching the title was different from his previous championships. In 2013, it was youthful exuberance. In 2019, it was dominant confidence. In 2025, it was relief, gratitude, and vindication. He'd proven that the greatest comeback in motorcycle racing history could end with the ultimate prize. This version of Marquez, the 7th heaven champion, showed that greatness isn't just about dominating when everything goes right. It's about fighting back when everything goes wrong. It's about refusing to accept that your story is over when everyone else has written the ending. From the fearless rookie who won in his first year, to the alien who dominated like no one else, to the broken warrior who fought through unimaginable pain, to the comeback king who proved the doubters wrong, to the champion who conquered the pinnacle one final time, Marc Marquez has lived multiple careers in one: 9 world championships across all classes, 7 MotoGP titles, equaling Rossi's legendary record, over 60 MotoGP wins, a comeback story that will be told for generations. At 32 years old, having achieved what seemed impossible just 2 years ago, Marquez has completed one of the greatest sporting stories ever told. The 7th heaven, the champion who refused to quit, the legend who wrote his own ending.